Hey everyone, Austin Schneider here. Welcome to Rise Podcast, where we talk about real influence, self-development, and entrepreneurship. What's up everyone? Welcome to another episode of Rise Podcast. Super stoked today to have Michael Easter on the podcast today to talk all things being uncomfortable. Michael, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me on. It's going to be fun.
Michael, I just finished up your book, The Comfort Crisis. What a good read. Literally read it in 2 sittings. So
that's awesome.
It was a good read because it actually sucked you into the story versus having it be just a bunch of stats and facts. It was really, really good storytelling, really good authoring. So it kept my attention for a long time.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I think humans communicate in stories. I think, books, for me at least, I'm the same way. Like, if I wanted to read a bunch of stats, I would just get a textbook because that's probably the best way to learn just raw data. But obviously not many people just sit down and read textbooks. And why is that? It's because humans learn in stories. So I tried to insert a little bit of that in there.
Yeah, you did a good job, man. We'll introduce to the listeners who Michael is, and then I want to kind of dive into the story of how you even got into writing The Comfort Crisis.
Yeah, sure. My background is I worked in magazines for a lot of years. So I worked at Men's Health magazine for maybe 7 or 8 years. And then 5 years ago, I took a job as a professor at UNLV. So I teach in the journalism department. And so half my job is teaching there and the other half is continuing to write. So I still do a lot of stuff for Men's Health and Outside and all kinds of other magazines like that. And I tend to focus on health and performance, not stuff that happens in a doctor's office, but more like fitness, nutrition, mental health, adventure stuff, all kinds of stuff. So that's kind of my background.
Yeah. And tell us about The Comfort Crisis.
Yeah. So, I mean, as a whole, I write this book, The Comfort Crisis, right? And it's
great name, by the way.
Yeah. I
so good.
Wish I could take credit for it, but unfortunately my editor came up with that one.
Yeah.
It's good. I mean, the overarching narrative of the book is this trip that I took up to the Arctic about 2 years ago now. So the idea is that, I left modern life and went up on this long backcountry hunt for a month into this world that is uncomfortable in every single way you could possibly imagine, right? So like, everything you do up there is uncomfortable and takes effort. To get from point A to point B, we had to hike everywhere. Even to get water, we'd have to hike down to a stream and then carry it all the way back up to camp. It was always cold. We carried in all our food, so you can't carry in a ton of food. You start to get hungry after a couple of weeks. And, it was just so much different than the life that the average person, especially in a developed country, lives today, where it's like, we've engineered our world to be comfortable in every single way you can imagine. This starts from thinking about, waking up in soft beds, temperature control. What do you have to do to eat breakfast? It's just there in the refrigerator or pantry and you microwave it, right? How we work. You and I are working right now behind screens, right? We sit all day. But even things like, we're no longer bored today because we have cell phones and Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime. And I mean, I could sit here and
name the microwave culture.
Yes. Name distraction technologies for the rest of this podcast. And I would never name them all. We're no longer in silence. The world is really loud now. So there's all these discomforts that we have engineered out of our lives that in our past used to actually serve us. And, they improve our health and happiness. And so I make an argument in the book that there are certain things that we need to sort of reinsert in our lives to become better in a lot of different ways.
So what actually sparked you wanting to write this book? Go back for me because one day didn't wake up and we're like, I'm going to write this book about just being crazy and comfortable and go to the Arctic for 30 days and tell a story. Like what was it leading up to that was like, I need to tell people about this and then do it myself?
Yeah. So I had a handful of things that happened in my life. I mean, first of all, I was just like leaning into comfort sort of my 20s, and that I was a drinker. So I come from this long line of men that we like to drink, we like to raise hell, we like to burn down honky tonks, that kind of thing. And, I think I did that because drinking's easy. It's comfortable.
Yeah.
At a party, you drink, things become easier. Takes away stress, it's easy.
Yeah.
But eventually that stops working, especially if you have sort of genes like mine, and then all of a sudden your drinking is no longer solving your problems. It's actually causing all your problems.
Sure.
And so I ended up getting sober, and that was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And it was exceedingly uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
It's like, that is not something that I wanted to do, but I realized, kind of had this moment where I realized like, oh, if you don't do this, things aren't going to end well.
Yeah.
So I kind of took the hard path, the challenging path, the uncomfortable path. And from that, it sort of, it kicked me in the head with like, oh, if you really want to improve X, Y, Z, name it in life, you're probably going to have to go, it's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. Yeah. You're going to have to go through discomfort. And then working for Men's Health, I ended up doing this story with a guy whose name is Donnie Vincent. He's a backcountry bow hunter and filmmaker, really fascinating character. And I went hunting with him for like 5 days off the grid.
Yeah.
So I had this idea that like, yeah, just discomfort can be good. But, we go up there and all of a sudden I'm faced with all these different discomforts that make me realize, oh my God, like our environments have changed so much, especially over the last 100 years. And the kind of uniting theme is that we just engineered we just do the next most comfortable thing. Products take off when they make people more comfortable.
100%. I was just thinking about that.
So it made me wonder, well, what would happen? And after getting back from that hunting trip, it was only like 5 days. It just felt way better, like in every single way, just calmer, more at peace, felt fitter, just felt better. And Donnie ended up inviting me up to the Arctic for this, 30-day whatever epic. And, I sounded a little dangerous, sounded challenging, sounded uncomfortable. I was like, I'm going to see what's on the other side of that. Like, I'm going to try it. And I did. And so that sort of getting the benefits of that, which I'm sure we'll get into, set me off on kind of like this world fact-finding mission where I started traveling the globe and talking to all kinds of different thinkers and seekers and researchers and people all over who have sort of found in their own unique way how different forms of discomfort can improve our lives. So that's essentially the story of the book.
Yeah, so good. And it makes you realize all of the things that you subject yourself to when it comes to being comfortable. I mean, you alluded to it. It's like our phones, the latest new app that's solving the problem. How do I save time? How do I save money? How do I become like or how do I get more distracted from different things, right? Because that's how businesses profit, is our attention, right? Attention's the huge currency in this world, and that's what people are trying to capture. And then if we are not self-aware of it, then that's when we get sucked in the vortex. And I see it all the time with the iPad at dinner table culture. It's the app culture. It's crazy, man.
Totally. And I think what's important too is that there's a reason for this, right? It's that in our past, as humans evolved, we lived in these rough and tumble, challenging, uncomfortable environments. The world was harsh. The world was hard. So doing the next most comfortable thing, whether that be constantly seeking shelter and warmth, avoiding all risk, overeating when you had the opportunity, being lazy, all these things provided us with a survival advantage. But now that we've engineered the world to become comfortable, safe, more or less effortless, these drives that we have, they backfire. So this is what, if you want to get dorky about it, evolutionary anthropologists call this an evolutionary mismatch. It's essentially you have traits that are beneficial in one environment, and when you bring them into a new, different environment, they actually backfire.
Interesting. So what you're saying is that what's really going on in society is not what's supposed to happen.
Right. It's just that we evolved to have these certain drives and characteristics that were good for us for pretty much all time. And now that our environments have changed so much, they're no longer good for us. So, I mean, so why does junk food taste really good? Well, because it's really, really freaking calorie dense. And why do we overeat it? Because in our past, if you found a calorie dense food, I mean, first of all, very hard to find. But if you were to eat it and eat too much of it, then you would add fat to your body, right? Well, in the past, we used to face times where there wasn't enough food all the time. So if you were able to fatten up when those lean times inevitably came, you're more likely to survive because you can draw on that fat. Well, nowadays, like, we're swimming in food all the time.
Yeah.
We still have this thing telling us, yeah, you should definitely crush that pint of ice cream. Like,
Yeah.
do it, right?
Yeah.
Because our brain, like our base level brain, doesn't know, oh, no, you actually can have ice cream every single day. We don't need to eat a ton of this right now, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's so many different examples of stuff just like that. I mean, the fact that
Totally.
we like to be lazy, you know, it's like in the past, it didn't make, like, exercise wasn't even a thing.
Yeah.
Like, we
Yeah.
invented exercise in the 1920s when we realized that, oh, now that our jobs have changed and we don't really have to work for our jobs, like farming, we're noticing that people are getting these weird diseases.
Yeah.
But the people who still do physical work, they don't seem to get those weird diseases. So there seems to be something about moving that keeps people free of disease. So
Totally.
let's invent this thing called exercise, right?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, and there's so much I want to hit on that. But I do want you to talk a little bit about, so one thing that I was just sucked into is when, and you alluded to earlier, oh, we just went on a little 30-day hunting trip or a 30-day trip. Kind of walk through what it took to get to the trip. It was a Masogi, right?
Yeah.
So talk what a Masogi is, and then what your experience with it was. And then I want to dive even more into what this could be and some of your specific experiences when you're out there.
Yeah. So I meet this guy whose name is Marcus Elliott, and he is, he's definitely a seeker. He's definitely out there. Like, he's, you know, went to Burning Man way back in the day. But he's also super brilliant. He got his MD from Harvard, and he decided that he wanted to, instead of being a doctor, he wanted to revolutionize sports science. And he more or less did. Like, he's the first guy who really put data and metrics and measurements into performance, athlete performance. So he's got contracts with the NBA and NFL, and he's essentially adding like AI and big data to player performance. But he also realizes that what really improves humans and human performance, whether it is an MVP of the NBA or some schmuck like me, is it can't always be measured, right? There are certain things that people have, like psychologically, like these gears that just allow them to sort of reach the next level. And so, like, how do we get to those? You know, so for that, he does this thing called Masogi. The idea is that once a year, you're going to go out, you're going to do something really, really freaking hard. And he defines that by saying you should have a true 50-50 shot of finishing it. The other rule is that you can't die, so you have to be relatively safe. But what happens is when you put people in positions where they might actually fail, things really start moving, because the human brain, it hates failure. And we have engineered our world that we're like never going to fail anymore. I mean, even think of how people approach something like a marathon. That's like this big goal. That's this big goal, right? Well, people don't approach that going, I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish. They go, I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish in 4 hours or whatever it is. We know we're going to finish, right? We don't do things that where we might actually fail. But in our past, we used to take on challenges where there was a high degree of failure all the time. And each time we did that, we would learn something from that. Like, we'd learn something about ourselves, because we would get to a point where we felt like we had to stop, we were going to give up, but we would keep going. And then you can look back at that point where you thought you were done and be like, oh, I sold myself short.
Yeah.
So where else in my life am I selling myself short, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of Masogi is that we're going to try and mimic these things that we used to do in the past that our environment used to show us, and it's going to tell us something about ourselves and make us realize that we are a lot more capable of anything we could possibly imagine. You know? So I learned about this idea of Masogi from Marcus, and Donnie calls me and he, you know, invites me up to the Arctic, and I kind of think of Masogi. I'm like, man, this sounds like challenging. This sounds tough. I don't know if I can do a whole 30 days, but I'm going to explore this thing, because I think by doing that, I might learn something about myself and also like human capabilities. Like, I'm a journalist. I want to learn stuff. yeah, so I signed on, and I mean, just to like give a sense of how remote it was, we had to take 6 planes to get up there. And the final one, the last plane we're in, it's me and a pilot. The pilot is essentially sitting between my legs because this plane is like the size of a freaking Snickers bar.
Yeah.
And it lands out on the middle of the tundra, like just like in the middle of the tundra, hundreds of miles, like 100 miles from anywhere. And then it's like, all right, see you later, back in 30 days,
Yeah.
So it was definitely remote and getting into some kind of extreme wilderness, that's for sure.
Yeah. That one story that you were talking about in the book where I think was it your first night or it was pretty early on where the winds in like your tent was about to fly out. Like,
yeah, we're, well, I mean, so we're very intelligent men, obviously. And we set we have this teepee that we used, and we set it up kind of on this point because we think like, oh, it's going to be protected from the wind because they're coming in from this direction. And overnight they shift, and like we just start getting hammered with 70-mile-an-hour winds, and like we're going to lose this shelter. And if you lose your shelter, that's like the worst thing that can possibly happen to you in the wild. And so we had to do this emergency takedown at like 4 a.m. And it was, I think it was the first day. So that was kind of like, welcome to the Arctic.
Yeah. And you're hundreds of miles away from anything, no cell service. You can't like hit somebody up and say, hey, like, can you come bring a new shelter or anything like that?
Yeah, exactly. So,
Crazy.
But
no, that's some wild stuff. I was reading that and my heart was racing for you.
Yeah.
What are some takeaways that you've gotten from your Musogis? Like or even specifically that one, like what were some big revelations?
Oh, just that people undersell themselves and their capability all the time. I mean, like me, I didn't know if I could finish that whole thing, but like, here's the deal. When you get out there, you realize like you just gotta have to take things one thing at a time.
Yeah.
And just by continuing to put that one foot in front of the other, all of a sudden you can look back and you are on day 30 and getting picked up. Or let's say that you decide like, I'm going to run 50 miles. That sounds insane. I could never do that. You keep putting one foot in front of the other, eventually you're at mile 50, right? And I think there's a good reason for this too, because if you think as humans, humans came up in these really challenging worlds, it's like, if you had a person who really thought they could do anything, but they couldn't, then that person would be like, that's what we call a hold my beer person.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
It's like,
sure.
I got this. And then you go out and you don't got this, well, then you die off, right?
Yeah.
So like that person's not spreading any genes. Flip it around and you think of a person who's like, no, I'm not doing that. Way too risky. I'm avoiding risk. I don't think I can do that. But if they get thrust into that and they do make it out, well, that makes a lot of sense. That person would survive, right?
Yeah.
So I think we have these genes that basically tell us avoid risk. You can't do that. Stay in your comfort zone. Don't do the hard thing. But when we actually do get out of our comfort zones and try things, we find that we're a lot more capable than we ever believed.
Yeah. And what do you think is conditioning us to think that we're capable of way less? Because like there's the 4-minute mile story, obviously, of the person who broke the 4-minute mile. And then what do you know? Boom, 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 boom. Is it culture that's telling us? Is it the media? Is it ourselves because we're so conditioned to sit on a couch? Or what is it that's conditioning me to think, oh, there's no way I could run 50 miles. But in reality, I probably could if I just did the one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's a lot of things. Like I just talked about, I think there's a genetic component, but there's also a huge cultural component. So think of the fact that you have found me unique as a person because I did this 33 days and wrote a book about it. Well, that's because it's 2021. If it was 1700 or 1600 or 1500, people lived in the freaking woods their entire lives, right?
Sure.
It's like I talked to this guy who's unbelievably successful in life, entrepreneur, and he was like, dude, I could never go up to the Arctic for more than 30 days. I'm like, no, you just think that because it's 2021. If this were 1821, we'd probably be having this conversation in the woods right now. I mean, humans evolved outside. Like we were outdoorsy in the sense that we didn't even have indoors. You know what I mean? So I think really it's just a lot of our ideas about limits are culturally conditioned. And something like, you look at something like, the 4-minute mile, which you mentioned, it's like people work so hard to do that for so long and no one could do it.
Yeah.
And then Roger Bannister does it, and what happens? Like 10 more dudes do it in like a couple weeks. It's like our brain essentially there's this idea called the central governor theory. It basically says your brain protects your body by trying to hold your body back and make you believe like you can't do that extra distance or you can't go a certain speed. But once there's a realization that you can, then it's just like, oh, okay. Then your brain flips and allows you to do stuff. So.
Is that like the same kind of concept with anxiety even? Because your brain will condition you to say fight or flight, and then it'll send a reaction to your body like, oh, I'm having a panic attack. Is it the same kind of?
Yeah, well, I think the brain, I think especially with anxiety, it's like the brain learns and defends. So, I mean, a good and also extreme example would be PTSD. So soldiers are trained to be hypervigilant in a war zone because that makes a lot of sense. You hear any noise, you need to assume that it's someone who is coming to kill you, right?
Yeah.
Because if you decide you're not going to do that and it is someone who's coming to kill you, you might actually die. And then we send soldiers back into normal life.
Yeah.
And that behavior is that doesn't make sense anymore. But the brain is going to default to safety, right?
Yeah.
So I think, so take, for example, public speaking with anxiety. The reason that people freak out with public speaking is because in our past, when we lived in these bands of people that were about 150 people, if everyone was in the tribe was looking at you all at once, that probably meant that you had maybe done something bad, right? Mm-hmm. They're like, all this attention is on you and you might get cast out into the wilderness alone.
Yeah.
And once that happened, you were toast because you didn't have anyone to rely on. So,
yeah. So have you done much like research on people like a David Goggins or people who are consistently just pushing their limits to almost a dangerous form?
So I think that sometimes people, and I see this in myself too, to be honest, with certain things, sometimes it's a transference of, okay, so I have this problem. Now I'm going to do something that is more socially and culturally, quote unquote, okay to deal with it, right? So like, take for example, me. It's like, I used to deal with my problems by drinking. Well, now in order to relieve stress, I go I go do a crazy workout where it's like, okay, I'm going to go climb some crazy mountain. Well, that's a lot more socially acceptable, right? But it's still just a way of like dealing with this problem, So you take someone's like a Goggins, like I understand that he had like a, tough childhood. Yeah. So you could see that like you can kind of correlate how someone with a really tough childhood, if like their way of dealing with that is running, well, yeah, I guess it would make sense for him to run 200 miles,
Yeah.
So I think we also need to find a balance and realize when sometimes we go overboard with things. That's something that I work on every day,
Yeah.
But
easy to take that uncomfortable a little too far.
Yeah.
It's just a method of dealing with it.
Yeah, exactly. I had a thought and then I lost it. Sorry.
All good. If you've seen any, what are the correlations with high performers, whether that's an athlete, whether that's an entrepreneur, whether that's a CEO, and their ability to step out of their comfort zone and do uncomfortable things? Is there one?
I think there's a handful of things going on. I think that especially with entrepreneurs, there's a willingness to take risks. Back to the idea of Misogi, it's like failure today is basically getting a bad look from your boss. Or if you're an entrepreneur, okay, your idea doesn't work and you don't have much money for a while, but the reality is you're going to live and like, you're probably going to be fine. It's not like you're going to starve to death. Right. But we still, like, our brain is still programmed to fear any type of failure, because in the past, failure could have really dire consequences in the sense that we could die. So I think that people need to be willing to, I think there needs to be a realization that like failure today is probably not going to be that bad. like take you. You've got this amazing company, you got 20 employees. What would happen to you if it all disappeared tomorrow?
I would probably go find a job or start something else.
Yeah, you're not going to die. Right.
Yeah.
But like that seems totally terrifying, right? So like
100%.
yeah. So I think that we overstate some of the things, and like that keeps us from taking risks that could be beneficial for business. Obviously, like we just talked about, you don't want to push it too far. You don't want to do dumb stuff. But I think that a lot of people just don't get started and don't leave that comfortable, cushy job that is soul sucking.
Yeah.
Because, oh, well, I don't want what happens if, you know,
For sure.
if I don't have something. So yeah, I don't know.
It's almost like, question. Yeah, no, it's almost like increasing the grit, you know, like increasing the grit in somebody that can correlate in like outside of these four walls, you know, like if I just go home and watch Netflix all day, is that going to make me better? Probably not. I'm not going to be a better business owner. I'm not going to be better to my employees. I'm not going to be a better leader, you know? So what am I doing every single day to push myself out of my comfort zone, to increase my grit, to increase my capacities, to know that I'm capable of doing a lot?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that like we in modern life, there's not a lot of things that are naturally shown to us that show you that you can do a lot more. So I think that's why there's a case for having to essentially select hard things and try and do different hard things, because then you kind of get a sense of like, you just build confidence along the way.
So true.
It's like, you know, before I went to the Arctic, I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, this is pretty insane. But now I'm just like, yeah, if I had to go outside for like 2 weeks, I'd be fine. Yeah, I might get rained on. I might get really cold. Who cares? Like, I'm going to be fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's like that sort of, I mean, maybe some people can just grab this like magic psychological gear where they're just like, yeah, I got this from the heavens. But I'm the type of person, and I think most people are, that you need to actually experience that to show yourself that you can do a lot more than you thought.
Yeah, super cool. And I try to push myself, and even after reading your book and looking at you, following you on social media and just hearing what you're putting out, it's like, man, like I feel like I could do way more than what pushes me. Like for instance, Saturday I ran 10 miles and I was like, dang, like 10 miles, nice. It's like, what if I did like 20, or I ran with a buddy who's training for an ultra, like 100-miler, and I'm like, why couldn't I do something like that? And it's kind of been itching at me. So maybe I'll try one of these insane things and just kind of see what happens.
You should. I mean, you definitely should. I think with Masogi, like the idea of once a year is important too, because like take you, if you were like, okay, I did 10 miles, tomorrow I'm going to do 20, then the next day I'm going to try and do 30. Well, eventually like your body breaks down, right? Yeah. So it's like this idea of like once a year, or if you're going to do 100, it's like sort of starting slow and ramping up to it. Just making sure that like once a year, I'm going to do something that I think is really going to be really, really freaking hard. And we're going to see how this thing goes, you know? And even if I don't finish it, it doesn't matter, because I guarantee you still learn something about yourself along the way. I mean, the point is not to finish this random event that we've invented. You know, the point is to have a like psychological, physical, emotional, spiritual experience all wrapped into one, you know?
Yeah, no doubt. You mentioned the governor. Is that actually something like the governor on our mind, like the governor that we place on ourselves? Is that actually proven as something that we actually have, or is that a theory that culture has been put on me or us as researchers or people who are into this stuff?
Yeah, there's this, it was proposed by a South American researcher named Tim Noakes, who's pretty famous in physiology. And it's called the central governor theory. And it basically just says that your brain is going to protect your body from ever going too hard. So it's applied to physiology and exercise science. But I do think it carries over to like so many different domains.
Yeah, with anything, with even like, because I study a lot on the brain, like in the mind, and like how do I increase my mindset? How do I elevate my mindset to manifest things or whatever that is? And I do think that there's correlation of constantly getting uncomfortable and expanding your mind and even if it's like reading or learning or pushing yourself from a fitness perspective, it's like that all correlates into what you're looking to achieve.
Yeah. And I like how you talked about it, how from a lot of different domains is because I think, my book has become somewhat popular in sort of fitness and physiology circles. And so it often gets narrowly interpreted as like, oh, do X workout that's harder or run X distance. When the reality is that I know people who can run 100 miles, but they couldn't sit in silence for 30 seconds. They would freak out. So that tells me we have a mismatch there. So I think that the idea that like we need to explore a lot of different things because each sort of domain can teach us something that can flow back into our ultimate goal.
Yeah. Hit on the silence piece for a little bit, because you had some good points in the book, especially as you were sitting in the Arctic and it was pretty silent, right?
Yeah. It's like unbelievably silent. Yeah. So like, especially one morning, which I read about in the book, is I like exited the teepee as the sun was coming up, and you just walk out there and it is so unbelievably silent that you start to hear your heartbeat. And I don't mean like you kind of hear it in the background. I mean, it is like a kick drum in your ear.
Yeah.
And then I start to hear my, like the vein from your carotid artery, like pumping blood into your brain. It's like, whoosh, whoosh.
Yeah.
Like it is crazy. It's like the most silence ever.
Yeah.
And it's uncomfortable at first. You're like, oh my God, this is like creepy.
Yeah.
And it turns out today that most people say they feel uncomfortable in silence. So we think this is a learned behavior, but you think of a lot of people will just leave the TV on all day or always have music on or something. But it turns out that all this noise that we live in, because we've created a ton of human noise too. Mm-hmm. Like I think the world is 4 times louder now than it was before humans sort of started building up our environments. And all this noise we live in is associated with some of it. They think it's part of the reason. There's a lot of reasons, but it's part of the reasons why people are so stressed out nowadays.
Yeah.
So you compare people who spend time in complete silence versus those who are like in even open concept offices. Well, the people who are in the like doing work in silence, they tend to have lower levels of the stress hormone cortisol. They tend to produce more work. The work tends to be better. And so there's something that tends to stress us out about noise. Mm-hmm. And you can see why this would be is because, if you think of the fact that we've made the world so noisy, well, before all this, we, evolved in worlds that were really silent. And anytime you would hear a noise, it was probably bad news. It was probably like a storm was rolling in.
Sure.
Or you were about to get in a fight, or some animal was about to attack you, right? So it would make sense that to associate noise with like, I got to release stress hormones.
Yeah.
But the difference now is that, in our past, those times were so few and far between and really acute. And now it's just like this constant noise. It just like drips these low level stress hormones into our body all the time. And so I think, in the book, I make the case that we need periods where we just sit in silence for a while. Like even working in silence, I think people will do better work. And yes, it is uncomfortable at first. So people will try this and email me and be like, dude, it was the worst. I couldn't stand it. I'm like, keep with it. Keep doing it.
Totally.
And then they'll often email me back and be like, all right, I'm glad I did. I can see why,
Yeah, and I think that's why meditation is catching such a hot thing right now, wouldn't you say? Like with people catching on to, the power of meditation, solitude, sitting by yourself and just thinking and coming up with creative ideas, because there's always something going on. I mean, I always have music going on or TV or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I struggle with meditation. I struggle with silence because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think everyone does. I mean, there's so many different things that meditation removes us from. All the noise, to your point, which I talk about in the book, at like being in solitude. Mm-hmm. And also, depending on what kind of meditation you're doing, it makes you realize like we spend all day like focusing on something in the outward world, whether that's our cell phone or a screen or whatever. And if we're not, then we're just like in our heads, just thinking about random nonsense,
So true. I think it makes you become more self-aware, gives you more ideas, like springs your creativity, because if you're just constantly reacting, when do you have time to actually think about yourself and zoom out, really?
Yeah.
You can't see a forest if you're in the trees. So how do you zoom out from like what you're actually doing and think about it, and then get the ideas of how you can calmly, proactively, not reactively go about your day and your life, really?
Yeah, exactly. I do think that that has been beneficial for a lot of people, and a lot of people can't do it. They just they can't. And I think for those people, that's where I sort of talk about that, like, find ways to be bored,
Yeah.
just remove yourself from digital technology, go outside, go for a walk. We know that being outside is good for our mental health. We know
Totally.
that time away from screens is good for our mental health. We know that light exercise is good for our mental health. So even just like a 20-minute walk where you don't bring your phone, you just go outside, that's pretty good too.
That makes me anxious thinking about that.
You can do it. I believe in you.
Thank you. So what practically can people, like, what could I do to continue to not be conformed to maybe my screen, or just constantly making sure that I'm not getting too comfortable? Like, what are you telling people?
Yeah, so I think that, I think a lot of the things we've been talking about, like the idea of try something that is going to be really hard for you once a year, can teach you a lot. People spend 12-ish hours a day on digital media now. And so everyone focuses on phones because we know we spend so much time on our phones. But oftentimes when people are like, okay, I took an hour off my phone screen time, now what do? They will then go watch more Netflix. It's like
Yeah, sure.
your brain doesn't know the difference.
Yeah.
So I think we just need time away from digital media. I'm not saying digital media is inherently bad. I'm just saying that maybe 12 hours of it a day is bad.
Yeah.
I also think that hunger is something that a lot of people struggle with. So you look at the data, and like 70% of the country is overweight. You look like you're very fit, so you don't fall into that. But
Thank you. Work hard to maintain it.
Yes, exactly. But I think that a lot of time you look at some of the research, and 80% of the eating that people do today is driven by reasons other than real hunger. So when I was in the Arctic, we had to pack in our own food. So we're eating like 2,000 calories a day, but we're probably burning like 4,000.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, like, I find myself hungry again, and it's like, oh my God, like I haven't actually been like legitimately hungry for a long, long time, but we know that the real uniting thing behind what helps physical transformation is, like, you want to lose weight, you're going to have to be hungry. I don't really care what diet
pretty
you
simple.
do. Yeah. And there's also, there's some potential benefits to fasting as well. So I think that's one that people can experiment with. More time outside. And I think that probably the biggest lesson that I got from doing this book is that, okay, so when I go up to the Arctic, like, I have to take a flight from Vegas to Seattle. That was the first flight of like 6. And I'm sitting on this plane, and flying is awful. It is awful. You're packed in there. It's too hot. The seats are uncomfortable. The movies are terrible. The coffee sucks. You get one bag of pretzels and it sucks. And then, like, the bathroom's super cramped, and it's just awful, right? But then it's like I spend a month in the Arctic, and I'm freezing cold the entire time. If I want to do anything, I have to put in effort. I have to hike down to a stream. If I want to go to the bathroom, for example, I got to take a rifle because there's grizzlies everywhere, and I have to, like, hike out into the wilderness, right?
Yeah.
There's not enough food. Everything's challenging. I am so bored because my cell phone doesn't work. I don't see a screen for 30 days. And so it's like, when I come out of that and I take the flight from Seattle to Vegas, the opposite, like, what do you think my experience of that flight was like?
It's the best thing ever.
Oh God, it's unbelievable.
The bathroom's great. These pretzels taste amazing.
Yeah, I had like 12 bags of pretzels. The coffee is amazing. I was warm for the first time. Like, I hadn't sat in a normal chair for a month.
Yeah.
So like, I tell you that to basically make the point that modern life is freaking amazing in every single way. And by not challenging ourselves and sort of getting out of it from time to time, we don't see that. And
so true.
When I come back, I can be a lot more grateful for all the just everyday basic stuff that we take for granted. And that makes me more grateful across the board. And that makes, like, every single one of my days so much better. Like, I just have a better attitude and interactions with people, because it's just kind of like,
I get to do this. Yeah.
This is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a perspective thing.
Totally.
And I'm sure you're pretty well traveled too. And I'm sure even coming back from different countries and seeing what some other people have to experience, it's like, we have it so good being in America. It's insane.
God, yeah.
It's like you were just in South America, and some of the Instagram stuff I saw on Instagram. I'm like, what the heck? Like, I have a panic attack looking at this. Like, you're in the middle of nowhere. Even me, I just got back from Portugal and just seen their quality of life. And I was in Vietnam a couple years ago, and it's like they're more happy than we are. It seems like in some ways, and they have a quarter of what we have. You know?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's like so like once a human has their basic needs met, like shelter, food, whatever, adding just more stuff on top of that doesn't make us happy. Like there's a certain basic income level that seems to increase our happiness, but once we hit that, adding more and more on top of it doesn't really do much for happiness. This is why there's the cliche of like mega wealthy people who are miserable.
Yeah.
Because we keep thinking that if we just get more and more and more, we're going to reach this, state of supreme happiness. And then you get up there and you realize, oh no, things are the exact same, except I just have a Ferrari instead of a Ford.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I have to worry about taking care of the damn thing too.
Yeah.
So it's like, that the question is like, why are you doing what you're doing? And if your idea is that, oh, by doing all this stuff, I'm going to become happy. I don't know if that's the case.
Totally. It's like the book Man's Search for Meaning,
Yeah.
Where it's just, you have to have a purpose of what you're doing, And in the third world countries, like Vietnam, for instance, they live for their family. Like that's, and to me, that was really inspiring. And that's what my biggest takeaway was, like, man, like I'm not doing enough with my family, or it's a perspective thing, and then you come out much more grateful, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look back on your life, you're not going to be like, I'm glad I built that, amazing company with 20 employees so I could buy that random, Rolex watch. You're going to be like, oh, I helped these people build their families and gave them an income, and it allowed me to spend more time with my family. Like, these are these random moments that probably didn't even cost that much money.
Yeah.
That I was able to have,
Yeah, no doubt. So with this last 18 months with COVID and stuff, I'm sure you're just seeing so much negative habits going on with being at home, with quarantine and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. I think that most people haven't figured out how to deal with it, and it's led them to sort of lean into even more comfort. So
sure,
we know a lot of people gained weight. We also know that drinking, drug use, porn watching, all kinds of stuff was up across the board. More time indoors, more screen time. But there's also been this other group that's smaller, that's used it to go outside more. So for example, national parks are overcrowded with people. Some people have used it to lose weight because it's been sort of a wake-up call to be like, oh, man, how was I living? Was I doing the right thing? And so while I think that for most people, maybe it hasn't been great, some people have used it as a real opportunity. And I think that is kind of a lesson of my book too. It's that sometimes you have to go through discomfort in order to see these things that you should be doing that can improve your life.
Yeah, no doubt. There's always two roads that you can go into. It's the comfort news, take it with a grain of salt, collect my unemployment check, or you could flip it around and go get after it. Yeah. I think what's crazy is just the correlation between doing hard things, getting uncomfortable, not just remaining in your routines, I guess, if you would, and pushing yourself physically, especially in high performance, outside of just that, with work, with relationships, with friendships, with just overall gratitude, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. And I think, it's important to rest and have those moments for gratitude. We surely can't go 100% of the time.
Yeah.
But I think that people have, it's interesting. It's there's all these books out now about this epidemic of burnout. And I think one of the reasons of that is just people have no freaking perspective about how good they have it. We complain that we have to sit behind a desk and work. And we should keep that to a minimum, but all right, why don't you try, working in a Russian gulag for
Oh,
a month and tell me how bad your burnout is. Like we don't have perspective to be like,
totally.
oh, this is actually a really cool opportunity. Um, how am I going to use it though? Like, how am I going to use my time? And are there ways I can just make this better? But while also realizing like life is really good. Because when you poll
Yeah.
people now, like only 6% of people think the world is improving. It's like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Super interesting. Crazy. And then back in the day, people had to walk 30 miles just to go get water.
Yeah, people have to walk along. Yeah, there's the other day I was reading this study about this tribe called the Seri tribe they're in Mexico on I think Tiburon Island, and the women would have to hike down the mountain. This is a desert. This is a desert island basically. They'd have to hike down the mountain through all these like cacti patches and stuff. I think it was like at least 10 miles to go down to the water source, and then they'd have to carry these big like things of water back uphill like every single
Yeah.
day. It's like,
And we're mad because we have to sit behind a desk and work all day
yeah,
and suffer from burnout.
yeah, exactly. It's just like a little perspective I think would do us good. I'm not saying that like, this environment we've set up with Zoom and everything is perfect, but we're just
Yeah.
bad at finding ways to offset it. So that's what my book is sort of giving you, making you realize like, here are the downsides of it. Here's how you do offset it. But also in the meantime, realize like, hey, this is a good problem to have.
Totally. It's kind of zooming out and saying, hey, the fact that we're right now connected to Wi-Fi, which is an invisible connection, who knows how that works, able to have a Zoom call, able to put a podcast out to help people out and realize this stuff, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, totally. Exactly.
So what are you working on now? What's coming up in the hopper? You're traveling a little bit.
Yeah, I got another book in the works, so that's taking up a lot of my time. That'll be that'll be interesting, and that's kind of the main thing.
What's the book about? I know you might not want to drop too much about it, but
I can't. It's about it's kind of a follow up to this book, and it just sort of expands it. So when I was in Bhutan, which we didn't talk about, but one of the people I talked to, talked about how people always want more. And I started thinking about that and how we want more of everything from like food to stuff is pretty obvious.
Yeah.
But also like information and influence and happiness, and why is that? And what are the repercussions of that? So it's sort of an investigation into like, how did we get to this point where we're always wanting more, and what is it doing to us now? And how do we find enough? So.
Yeah, interesting. And that's crazy nowadays with social media and like comparison and all that stuff. It's like, I'm sure that's such a big driver in today's modern age of just wanting more, and this person has that. And I'm sure there was zero of that going on back in the day.
Yeah. And there might've been some of it, but it was very limited. It's like, how much more did you actually get? And now it's like, you just take it ad nauseum now,
Yeah. And then going to like South America, I'm sure you're like what are their perspectives on things and stuff and influence?
Well, it's, I went into the Bolivian Amazon and I went and hung out with this tribe called the Chamane tribe. And the reason I hung out with them is because their relationship with food is a lot different than ours. And they also have the healthiest hearts ever recorded by science. Meanwhile, the thing that is most likely to kill you and me statistically is heart disease. And we completely ignore it. So it's just kind of looking at that. That was that section.
Crazy. I'm excited to read it, man.
Cool.
How can these listeners find you? I think everybody listening to this, if you are an entrepreneur, if you're looking to just have a better perspective and also push yourself, Comfort Crisis was a great read. Again, I pounded it out in 2 sittings. I really enjoyed it. I enjoy following you, Michael. I really like the high performance that you do and just your perspectives and what you're even putting out on social, even though you're not these top influencer who you have somebody else posting for you and all that stuff. I like how it's human. So it really allows me to kind of see behind the scenes of you and your hunting adventures and you talking what you're walking. So
yeah, cool. I appreciate it. I got a website. It's eastermichael.com, and then the book's available everywhere. And yeah, I'm on Instagram. My handle is Michael_Easter. I appreciate it. This is a fun conversation. I'm glad we got to have it.
This is cool, man. I appreciate it. So much gratitude. We'll get this up and we will see you on the next one, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Everyone, thank you so much for watching and listening to the Rise podcast. Please do me a favor and subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already. Share it with a friend if you think it was valuable, and also give it a thumbs up. If you want more content, feel free to follow me on Instagram at Austin R. Schneider, where I'll be dropping snippets of this and other type of content. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel and be on the lookout for weekly podcast episodes just like this one. Thanks, everyone.